Okay, it says I'm live. Okay, I'm live, and I promise. I told myself I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on. Um, I got my. I was going to work on this delay. I didn't get a chance to do it on this delay, um, and I think it's just because of the processing uh, from the video. So, what I want to talk about is different pieces of gear in the studio, and so as people chime in, I'm going to talk about. Let me see. Whatever. Okay. Microphones. So, all right. Make sure everything's all right. I guess I'm going to kind of continue to wait and see as people chime in. And of course, if no one tunes in, then I'll shut it down. So we'll wait a few minutes and see as people starts to. It is football Sunday, so um, some people might be watching the game and stuff like that. Warheart Arts, welcome. Okay, so yeah, people. Okay, so um, what I'm going to talk about tonight, and we all can talk about it, is I'm going to talk about compressors, EQs, microphones, mic pre's, studio monitors, stuff like that. So people have been wanting me to talk about microphones for a while. So um, I'm going to talk about microphones. Then I'm going to talk about the signal chain, which we'll go from microphones to mic pre's, and then from mic pre's to compressors, EQs, and so forth, all the way through maybe the console or directly into your DAW. So welcome everybody. As everyone starts to tune in. So if some people are a Green Bay Cowboys fan, they might be watching the game because it just started, even though I just got finished watching Kansas City beat up Baltimore. And of course, the Titans, they just they don't win a whole lot. They play even the Texans just, you know. But anyhow, we're gonna talk about. So I got a few microphones, um, quite a few, but oh, he said I just watched the Bears. Yeah, the Bears. I think the Bears won. I have to look at the schedule. So I'm going to talk about like some of the microphones. Like this is a solid state microphone, and then this other microphone. This one is a tube microphone, but this is actually a company called Bad Axe. They basically was a AKG C12 clone. Um, and of course, I have a ribbon microphone right here. And then, of course, a couple of the world now favorites dynamics, which is an SM58 and an SM57. So, which is a dynamic microphone. And I do have some 47. It's a warm audio 47, but it's on the what's your name? So let me see. Is that my Mac fan? Might be. So our Warhorse says I'm not big into sports ball. Well, I'm not super big into it, but I do watch, basketball and football and sometimes baseball. But I'm not like a diehard. I'm not a sports nut where you get guys that talk about sports. They can name players, coaches, stats, certain players, and I'm just, it ain't that serious to me, especially when either between pro ball or even college. They can name. I mean, I'm just not that deep into it because my craft is music. But there are people out there that I keep up a little bit. Like, of course, Baltimore's football player Jackson. He just messed up his I believe it messed up his ankle, so or his something he messed up, but he's gonna be out for a while. So, but anyhow, so I'll see you in Australia. So we don't in the United States we don't follow rugby, so we don't know anything about that kind of sport. But what I want to talk about is these microphones first. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna talk about it. So what I've learned is when I first got started in recording, you know, most of the time I would see more of the solid state microphones, um, and something like this is a Rode NT2. Of course, this wasn't around when I first started, but something similar to this. Of course, we've heard about the Newman U87 and microphones like that, which is a solid state mic. It's not a tube microphone; it's a solid state. And then, of course, I've heard about ribbon microphones, but I've always heard that ribbon microphones like this one, you really have to be careful with the diaphragm. The capsule, which is a ribbon capsule, simply because they are fragile. So I never knew, you have to really be careful what you use on a ribbon microphone. But then as I started going to more recording studios, the biggest thing that I've noticed that they were using the most when it comes to condenser microphone were tube microphones. And I'm like, what's the deal with the tube microphones? And and of course, the popular tube microphones would be like a U47 tube, 67 tube, and so forth, the 251 tube. And there's just a whole wide range of them, but just a wide range. I was like, why, and then when I started using tube microphones, I noticed why. I know why it's like one of the recording studio. I'm talking about the big recording studio, the commercial recording studios. It's one of their secret sauces to warm sounding vocals, right? Now, the other microphones that I would see the most, of course, there's a whole bunch of dynamic microphones, but there's Sennheisers and so forth. But the most popular microphone I would see on most instruments that they would record in recording studios would be, when it comes to dynamic microphones, is a SM57 and a SM58. I would see this the most on instruments and so forth. Then I would see quite a bit. I would see the SM58 a lot on live sound for vocals, guitar cabinet, stuff like that. On a live sound, I would see quite a bit of SM58s. So, so why, of course, I was like, well, why, you got ribbon microphones, you got, you got ribbon microphones, you got, tube microphones, you got, there's solid state type of condenser microphones, then there's tube microphones, and then of course there's dynamic microphones. And I was like, well, I just got to the point where I was following the trend. I was like, okay, well, these studios, there's a reason why they're using certain microphones, certain ribbon microphones, like you'll see RCA 44 or Royal 121 or whatever. And then they would use, like, for vocals, they would use like an AKGC 12 or Telefunken 251 or whatever, or they would use like a 47 tube microphone or whatever. And I'm like, there's a reason why. So I didn't really question it. So I said, well, let me start getting microphones along them lines. And they work. They actually work, So I got a few comments before I continue to talk about microphones. Warheart said, I only have a few cheap mics, looking to upgrade and expand a little bit. I would, like I started the same way. But believe it or not, there's a difference between, I would say, inexpensive microphones that really sound good compared to a cheap microphone, which, like a $69, maybe a $69 Amazon special or something like that. It might not sound, as warm, and because cheap microphones tend to sound really, really brittle on the high end, especially. But a better sounding microphone tend to sound a little bit fuller in the mid range and the low end, and they also tend to sound better, sound fuller, and have more presence. So our laid back beats composer, salute, welcome. Like I said, I'm just talking. We're talking microphones and mic pre's and stuff like that. So he said, Warhurst says, I'm from outside Cleveland. Browns have been an embarrassment. Oh, so okay? I didn't know you was from in the Ohio area. That's where I'm from. I'm from Ohio, but I'm closer to Cincinnati. So the Bengals is, trust me, the Bengals are they're not like Kansas City and like that, but the Bengals have been doing a little bit better. But the Bengals seem to choke, and especially if they make it to the playoffs. I don't know what's, it's like between the Browns and it's like Ohio's teams are, except for Ohio State. So, but I worse, so I moved because it was an embarrassment. I'm laughing because I totally understand, because it's kind of like when you see the Browns, you be all hype and you be, man, I hope the Browns, they don't seem to get it done. It's like the Browns, man, it's like that whole Cleveland area, even the Indians, even the basketball team, I don't know what it is with Cleveland. So, and of course, Cleveland's mad when LeBron left, to go to LA and all that. But anyhow, so I mixed up, said I just purchased a Stem, you got Steam, but I think you meant Stem Audio SA87T across the Newman and C Hypercone, because it's like a US. There are a lot of, which another thing I was going to talk about is for people that want to upgrade. You don't have to buy Telefunken or Newman anymore. You can get away with the clones. So now there is so many factors as to why some studio engineers may use a condenser tube over a condenser solid state. But what I've noticed is, for some odd reason, dynamic microphones seem to do really well on acoustic instruments, for the most part, drums especially. But then they'll use some condenser mics, to capture the entire low end of the drum. So it's kind of like, here's my question for people that are tuning in. Would you use a solid state condenser microphone on vocals? Something like not even this Rode NT2, which it's a really great microphone. Would you use a tube microphone This is like I said, this is a T1 T11A, which basically a C12 clone, but this has been modified. Um, or would you use a dynamic microphone on vocals, such like this SM58? Some people the SM7, SM7B, or whatever. And to me personally, it's kind of like a dynamic microphone is really designed to capture an immediate source in front of it, versus a condenser microphone, especially when it has cardio patterns like this one. I can set it to cardio to capture immediate sources, but sometimes the engineer wants to capture the ambience of things behind the microphone as well. So he might switch it to figure 8, right? Or he might switch it to omnidirection to capture everything in the room. That's done by design, so it really depends on what the engineer is capturing. But if you get a microphone that doesn't have that capability, then you might be limited to what you're trying to capture. So other than if I get more questions about dynamic microphones, I would say this. From my experience of me watching engineers, most of the time they're going to use condenser microphones for like in the room, maybe overheads, and they definitely on vocals. They might use it on some sources like guitar cabinets, and so forth. But sometimes they use ribbon microphones because ribbon microphones usually tend to be more mid-range-ish. They really don't have a whole lot of top-end presence or a lot of low-end. They're more to capture details of a mid-range area of a source. So they might use a ribbon microphone. But then some people like that, even on vocals. It depends on what it is. But what I notice the most for dynamic microphones is on like direct instruments, like on drums and sometimes loud sources like guitars, like a dynamic microphone, for the most part. So that's so much on microphones. Other than if somebody writes something in the comments that might give me an idea to talk more about microphones, but that's all I can really talk about on microphone. I just got a few of them over here, unless I want to spend a little bit more on it. Believe it or not, I don't think I see that Warhard said he sold a C314, and I got another person that comes on the channel that he was ragging out the C314, and I'm like, going back and forth trying to explain to that you got engineers that have certain gear that they like, and you got engineers that have certain gear that they hate. And I'm like, well, just because you don't like the C314 doesn't mean it's a bad microphone for other people that use, So, okay. Martin Morrison, welcome, Martin. So he's asking the question: is DIY microphones difficult to assemble? No, not really. Let me open up. Okay, because you really think about it. Let me open up this Rode, right, as an example, right? Really, other than this, really technically in this microphone, at the very top of every microphone is where your capsule is. And a lot of times it's got a support casing around the capsule. I'm gonna open up my other tube right quick, and so you can really see if I can get even more detail. on it. I'm gonna open up this tube microphone. Okay. Other than the capsule, and other than the capsule, like this is a K47 capsule. There's a wire soldered to it. And then after that, the wires that come from that capsule at the top comes to a circuit board. Some of these microphones have 2 circuit boards, some have 1. And on it, usually, for example, on this side of the microphone, you have a few capacitors, a couple of resistors, a couple of diodes. And then there's more on this side where you have some more capsules, capacitors, and so forth. And that's being wired. This was a tube microphone, so there are wires that go to the tube. So there's a tube right there. It's a 12AX7 tube. And then this is going to the output transformer at the bottom, which is wire, just a couple of wires. And then this because of the transformer, it's a 7-pin. So it's going to go to a power supply source, which I have over there, which is going to power the microphone. But to solder this, the board is only like maybe, I would say, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then on this side is maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 components. And a lot of times when you get these microphone circuit boards, they tell you which, some of these are polarity fixed, positive, negative. So you know to put positive in one lead terminal and the negative in the other. If you follow that, you could probably assemble this microphone probably within an hour. So it's not very hard. I would say it shouldn't take no more than an hour, maybe 2 hours max on this type of microphone. So microphones are very, they're not very hard. Just, take your time and follow the directions. But yeah, so that, I hope that answered that question. It's not a whole lot of complicated components in a microphone. So let's see. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it was dynamic microphone, so forth. Yeah. So welcome in network. And okay, welcome Scotty Horson. Oh, from Lima, Ohio. Yep. So we got another Buckeye in the chats. I'm from the Dayton area. So I mix up say, have you ever tried Townsend Spear? Oh no, I haven't. So Warren says mic modeling is a silly. I think here's the thing, which brings me to my next portion of the topic, which would be mic pre's. Because really, technically, if you think about the entire signal chain, before let's go recording studio, old school commercial recording studio signal flow path, right? Back in the day, everything was done through a console. The mic pre's on the console, the EQ, and then they would insert dynamics if needed, compressors and so forth. And then that would actually either bus out from the bus routing out of the console or direct out into the tape machine. And then once they record the tape, they would bounce the tape. The outputs of the tape would go right back into the console for mixing. Some consoles are split where the channels would either have a couple of set of faders, one's for monitoring, one's for playback, or it would be split where half of the board will be the input recording side, and then the other half will come back from the tape machine for them to mix on. So it varied on the type of console, but the signal flow would go through the mic pre of the console. So it would come from the live room, and that would be wired into a patch bay that would feed into the console. Console would then feed to the tape. Then the tape would feed back to the console. Outboard gear, meaning out of a console and out of a mixing board, outboard gear would be so that the engineer would have a different sounding flavor than what would be in the console. He might want a different sounding mic pre, different sounding EQ. So if you look at it that way, well, back in the day, most of the time when music was recorded, it was recorded with real musicians. So you would have, and with the real musicians, you would have your drums, your bass, your keyboards, whether they're synthesizers or they're just pianos or Wurlitzers or Fender Rhodes or whatever. Then they would use guitars, and they would actually have percussions, and they would also have horns and would have vocals for the most part. So all those sources at the time required microphones, and they would start using whether they're going to use a dynamic microphone with a tube. Most of them use or not a dynamic, a condenser microphone with a tube, or they want to use a solid state microphone condenser, or they would use dynamic microphones or even ribbon microphones. And it depends on what the engineer would like the best sounding microphone on that source. But everything was using microphones, and they would use the mic pre's on the console. But as we start getting into different outboard gear, different, where they start building separate mic pre amps, different outsources of different equalizers and compressors and so like that, it gave the engineer a choice of sounds that those pieces of gear would make. So if you look at it like that, so I'm trying to get to my point of the mic modeling. So mic modeling is probably no different than like a plugin. There are people that are going to be diehard defenders of plugins, and they will always say that a plugin will match a real piece of hardware gear. And I'm going to sit there and say, no, it will not. Because a plugin is a software emulation of a real piece of gear. You really think about that. That's almost like driving a car video game and actually driving a real car. You and I know driving a real car feels totally different than sitting in and driving a software emulation of a car. So now the thing is, if you're playing a game or whatever, of course, the game is limited to how they program where this car can go or whatever the case in the game, versus in the real car, you can pretty much drive on a real street, right? So it's kind of like that. Both of them gonna, but with the software and plugins and stuff like that, because they are able to make the plugin emulate the real piece of gear really, 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 really close. So you take a compressor or an EQ, it really is really hard to hear so much of a distinctive difference now compared to 20 years ago with plugins compared to an actual real piece of gear now. So that's why a lot of people say, well, I'm fine with plugins, which you can be now. You couldn't be in then. because part of the sound of all this, it's a lot of it is the electronics. It's kind of like if it's like with the mic modeling. Well, if you think about the mic modeling, well, software. It's like me opening this microphone. Y'all saw circuit boards and a tube and a transformer and all that. Well, what makes this microphone sound like it sounds is because of the electronics. It's because of the output transformer. All the electronics is what makes it sound like it sounds. When you don't have those transformers, your computer, your Mac, or your PC doesn't have transformers in it. Well, the power supply has a transformer, but that's for the power supply. But I'm saying the transformers that gives it the sound that your computer doesn't have. The software emulation of a plugin doesn't have it either. And that's what you're looking for, is those even and odd order of harmonics that transformer is putting out that gives it that analog warmth is the transformers. Well, if you don't have those transformers, you're not going to get that. Your computer, you may be thinking they're trying to use computer algorithms to make it sound like the plugin is warm, but really you're not going to capture that without actually having it. That's the best way I can describe it. That is the very best way I can describe it. So going back to, it took me a while to really understand why big commercial studios were getting the results they were getting. And it's kind of like, you would go to if you ever been to, I don't know anyone that's, while everyone's watching, the question would be, have you ever been to a commercial studio? I'm talking about a pro level commercial studio. And I'm not talking about like Man Network, who has a commercial studio. He says he has 25 of them. I'm teasing, man. So for the ones that have not or never been in the environment, let's say a lot of people that's been on this channel, they just only started in their bedroom or whatever. And my question would be, for the ones that's never been in a commercial type of recording studio, have you ever been to one? That I would like to see as people, type yes or no. But if you have, and you've been to a commercial studio where you see the live room, where everyone's, musicians are going to be at, they have vocal booths, maybe drum booths. They might have different rooms where the amps would be in and so forth, and they're miking the amps or whatever. They have all the rigs set up for the bass player, the guitar player, and so forth. And then in the control room where all the gear's at and the engineers at, you walk in there, you see whatever console they have, or whatever source they have, and then all the gear they have. If you've been, it's kind of like going to let me see some of the top recording studios out there. You have to ask yourself, when you listen to the millions of records that came out, and I'm talking about by thousands of artists, I'll go from the Rolling Stones to U2 to AC/DC or Def Leppard, or you go into like R&B like Freddie Jackson or Luther Vandross or Mariah Carey and so forth. All these big name artists, Janet Jackson and so forth, when they go into these recording studios, why does it sound like it sounds? And simply, and I'm going to not, yes, part of it is definitely gear, but a lot of it is mostly acoustics, rooms, experience, and of course, definitely the thing that we may or may not think about is when a musician is playing in that recording studio, believe it or not, the quality of the instrument and the quality and experience of the musician is also part of the sound. The quality of the vocalist is definitely part of the sound, because if you have a crappy singer, they're not going to sound good in a pro level studio or in a home studio. It's just not going to sound good. A crappy singer don't sound good. Period. We all know that. So a lot of times the untrained people think the recording studio itself is the magic sauce to making anything that is bad sound like, and that's not true. I got more people tuning in. So welcome, Rockport Tigger. So other than a really nice sounding microphone like this tube microphone, which has high quality upgrades in this microphone, including the capsule, going through a nice preamp like I have back on the rig over there, and that's going through a nice sounding compressor because you want to control your dynamics and peaks and so forth like that. Then that's what's being recaptured to the recording source. In my case, through an Antelope Orion AD to D converter, which then goes into the DAW. So basically, there's quite a few factors to that. That's why I always stress a decent sounding microphone going through a decent sounding preamp will get you decent results. So let me see. I got some more comments popping in. So, and that's why I don't think the mic modeling can actually get there. The two places that I don't want to skimp, and that's just me, is microphones and preamps. Out of all of it, let's see. Ojila Pix, welcome. Let's see. Warhart says my console is in line with toggles and a merger. Warhart's being inline, so I'm imagining you probably have something like an MCI or maybe an API or an SSL or something like that. Oh man, never said that. And that's why I use need preamps and EQs. And let's see. Oh yeah, you said yeah. You're talking about as far as the microphone and the way it behaves. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me go on. A Horace, I think I'll say for you 87 clone. I believe it or not, I think a nice affordable one. I think a nice affordable U87 clone. Warm Audio has one for $599. There's one they've been talking about lately. I've been seeing it's called Dockman. They have a U87 clone for about $699 compared to spending $3,000 on a Newman, which I think you'll be perfectly fine with. So, it said Mag Juice says, excuse me. I've been to quite a few in Australia, but not the crazy expensive ones, but the mid-size. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, it says Sunshine Studios here have a Neve desk that's now owned by Kanye West. I recorded the drums. Okay, gotcha. Okay. Rockport Tickets is crap in, crap out, right? Award says, I wish I had an API. I have a soundtracks too. Gotcha. Okay. Ain't nothing wrong with that soundtracks. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the soundtrack. Believe it or not, a lot of number one hits were recorded on soundtracks, consoles. Yeah, Dogman. That's the one I'm talking about. The Dogman U87. It's $699 and is getting a lot of hype for a U87 clone. I'm today. I would say clones are better, way better than when they initially started doing them about 10, 15 years ago. It's like with software and DWs, everything's so much better that now, as good as clones are, And some of these clones are still pricey. Like Audioscape and Stem Audio stuff is still their stuff is kind of pricey. There is Ventec Audio, there is Heritage Audio, there is Warm Audio. There's other companies. Even Behringer's starting to improve their clones with the new Behringer clone stuff. Even Behringer's gotten tons better. I would say I don't see why anyone would spend that kind of money on, I would say, the go-to expensive gear anymore. I don't see it. Now there's always going to be people say, well, the reason why the most expensive gear, blah 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 blah, is because of the highest quality of build. I cannot dispute that, because that is one thing I can say about when you buy expensively, expensive gear. They tend to be built very well. But sometimes with clones, some clones can be cheaply built. Like there's some people that have complained about like golden age projects as an example, whatever, or Behringer is really known for having lackluster buttons and knobs, really cheaply made knobs, stuff like that. But now my thing is, if your budget allows you to buy like a Neve console and ATC speakers, and you can buy Newman microphones and Universal Audio 11, but by all means. But I think most people just can't afford that. So yeah, let me see. Oh yeah, Rob Porter said you can buy clone kits too. Believe it or not, if you have patience with a soldering iron, because also with that a do-it-yourself kit, you can also upgrade. You don't have to use the clone kit that comes with, like, let's say it came with a cheap transformer. You want to use a more like a Jensen or a Cinematic transformer, or let's say it came with a cheaper, let's say it came with a TLM 47 op amp, and you say, well, I'm going to use a Jensen 990 or a Burr Brown op amp. You can do that. I'm going to use this op amp, a higher quality op amp. So you can do that with a do-it-yourself build. So let me see. There's a few more comments. There's true clones, and then there's knockoffs, and then there's decent in between. Like anything else, is when it comes to clones, yes, there's going to be, it's kind of like. So Mad 2 says no regrets on the Behringer 676 so far. It's just fine for my dirty rock needs. Like I said, what Behringer's gotten smart with is they've gotten these engineers, that actually designed them some actual nice sounding higher end clones, like the Behringer 369, the that 676 they just came out with, their 1073, because the engineers are coming from those different companies that actually know how to build an authentic, genuine clone. So Behringer have upped their game. The only thing that's going to hurt Behringer is their name. Whether you say Behringer or Behringer. I think it's pronounced Behringer, because he's German. But we've always said Behringer, but I think it's Behringer, because he's German, and initially started his company in Germany. So yeah, War says it's pronounced Breakinger. I got Behringer gear, so I'm not dogging any company. I don't believe in dogging any company, whether you like them or not. That's just not me. So let's see. Yeah, it's like anything else. It's like you said, when you build your own, you can upgrade the codes, caps, switches. Yeah, you can. Because believe it or not, that's really the only seriously difference between cheap gear and expensive gear is better, basically better electronics. You know, it's like if I build myself a Newman U87 microphone and get a DIY kit, you can get those from microphoneparts.com or something like that. I believe it's called microphoneparts.com, and build yourself a do-it-yourself universal audio, not universal audio, a US87 microphone. And if I look at they're using, if the Newman is using certain transformers, capacitors, resistors, and I find out the exact same components with the same capsule, and I got the same style of body that the microphone's going to go in as far as the build of the microphone, it's going to be a Newman U87 because it has the exact same components. That's what gives it this sound is the electronics, the components. So you can do that. Oh yeah, Behringer bought Midas, and they're up. Yeah, exactly. They bought not only just Midas, they bought TC Electronics. They bought Tannoy. They bought, I don't know, 12 or 13 different companies, and they've just improved everything. Their number one seller is their Behringer X32 mixer. He sold millions of them. And those mixers were averaging $3,000 to $4,000 a piece. So you do the math. So, and that's just that the interfaces, the speakers, the so much stuff, the synthesizers that he's been making, and so forth. So Matthew has says my brand snobbery ends right when my budget runs out. Like I said, I don't believe in. Here's the reason why I don't bash brands, because someone on my channel or anyone's channel or whatever the case, and some people don't care, but me, if I got followers and I start talking about Clark Technic as an example, and they're using Clark Technic, and I'd say, oh, Clark Technic is pieces of crap or whatever, what's going to happen is they're going to get offended. And, especially if they're a loyal follower. If someone has been, they've been having success with the Clark Technic, like me, I've had success with Clark Technic products. So, I would come off as a hypocrite. If I come out there and start dogging Behringer, and people are like, well, you got Behringer gear. So that's the reason why I don't do it. But anyhow, welcome Ice Mike to 1200. We're just talking about mics and mic pre's and stuff like that. And, stuff that was in the title. And, right, Portic says, what time do I usually start on? It varies. So I'm liable to start at 7:30, maybe 8. It varies. It really varies simply because of what's going on that Sunday. So, and sometimes I don't get a chance to do it on every Sunday. I really, so it varies. For a while, I wasn't able to do it every Sunday. For a while, I was gone. So, but I'm usually between 7 and 8. So you got to kind of look out. If you kind of follow the channel, you got to kind of look out for me around that time frame. So let's see. All right. So anyhow, I said the stupid YouTube bell doesn't work anyway. Okay. Yeah, it's like me. I've had I've had a few Lisa's 3630. I had a couple Lisa's 3630s that broke. And I just end up, and I use my Lisa's 3630. There are people out here that hate the Lisa's. I have no problem with my Lisa's 3630s, but there are people that hate them. That's another compressor that people hate or they like. And the Lisa's products altogether, there are people that hate it, on YouTube that don't even like the Lisa's ADATs. Lisa's were known for having problems too, especially with ADATs. I'm like, it is what it is. Um, so it varies because there are some people that hate gear, had problems with them. They hate the gear, and there are people like that had the same gear and had absolutely nothing but success with them. So it really varies on the gear. So I was talking about microphones, and I talked about microphone preamps as an example. Let's talk about mic pre's because there are so many mic pre's out there. Um, I would like to, people to chime in. What's your favorite mic pre if you got one? You know, do you have one, or do you use the mic pre on your mixer? Do you use the mic pre in your audio interface? Do you use external mic pre's? Do you mic pre's on the console, and so forth? So I would like to see people chime in on that. So I thought somebody put A&H. I thought I saw, oh yeah, Warhol Arts, A&H, Allen and Heath, which I have an Allen and Heath console here. So I would like to see, what, for me, I have several mic pre's, and of course, everyone knows the least, not the least, the Avalon 737 is my vocal mic pre. But if anyone's seen the price on those, at least those Avalon 737s, those prices have skyrocketed. I was on the internet today, and I was like, the average Avalon 737 is now pushing close to $5,000. I'm like, those things, they've always been a popular preamp, but they almost like they didn't doubled in price. I think, let me see. If I get on, let me see here. Oh yeah, remind me later. Let me see. Let me see here. Avalon 737. So far, the cheapest. I'll hear some used ones if they don't have any. Hopefully, they don't have any problems with those Avalons. On the cheap ones, I've seen one. I see one right here for 1,400. Here's another one that's 1,400 on Guitar Center, and then there is one that's 1,500 on Guitar Center. But on average, here's one on Sweetwater that's almost $3,500. So I thought it was on, I was on Reverb, and I saw some Avalon 737 as much as $4,800. I'm like, sheesh. I know I wouldn't pay that much. So let's see. Their DBX is a DBX 2 and 4. Then the focus rate. Okay, gotcha. Oh, he said he had a 676 now, but before he used to have a UL LA610, but not for 10 years. Too expensive to read. But yeah, they're pricey too. I think they didn't shot up another almost $1,000 for those 610s. Oh, so yeah, I wouldn't mind having an Altron 1073 and a Lindale LA2A Clonex. You can buy the Altron, which is the Altron. I have the version 2s, which is basically an MP73 V2, or it's the MP73 EQ V2, which stands for version 2 by Altron. And those are only about $400. And then the Lindale LA2A is about $400. So for about $800, you can have that. You can have that. So Robert said those Avalons are all not the same. Probably not. Like anything else, when it comes to high-end gear, one piece of gear is not always gonna. It's kind of like when people talk about the different revisions of 1176s. Revision A is definitely not going to sound like revision C or D or whatever the case. So okay, I mixed up. Says SSL alpha channels, SSL X rack, XF 627s, and Heritage Audio 1073 styles, but not enough faves. Depends on the source, right? So, but that was just one. I was looking ahead like, man, those, and I was fortunate. I was fortunate to have two Avalons, but so the reason why I'm talking about that, let's say, with a good, because Avalon's, for example, is basically a channel strip. It's a mic pre with an EQ and a compressor, and you have the option to put the EQ in front of the compressor or the compressor in front of the EQ. Some people like the compressor sound, then EQ it. Some people like the EQ the sound, then compress it. So I try not to use a whole lot of EQ or compression when it comes to recording. I try to use that after the fact, but it really depends. I might use a little bit of compression in case I have someone that sings really, really loud, and I don't want them to, the peaks be ridiculous. So, so you look at the source, the signal to your recording source. Most of the time, the microphone in the environment, whatever your studio environment and whatever source you're recording, is then going from the microphone. So you're trying to figure out what microphone to capture the source into a mic pre, and then from a mic pre into, do I want to use a compression EQ? Am I going to use it on the console, or going to use some external pieces of gear? And then from there, it's going to go to my recording source, which most, for 90% of us, is the DAW. So the next thing would be compressors. From my understanding, believe it or not, the most, what's the best way I can describe it? The best way I can describe it would be, most people don't have a good understanding of compression, equalizers, or even reverbs and delays are probably the most misused or misunderstood in recording. So anyone that might want to elaborate, welcome. Welcome Creative Space. Welcome. Anyone that might want to elaborate, I'm elaborate a little bit on compressors, because if we think about compressor, no matter how we look at it, there are usually 5 parts to the compressor that were the 5 functions of a compressor that we mostly use. Some compressors do it totally different in functionality. Some compressors are a little bit more limited. Some compressors are a little bit more flexible. But compression is probably the most, because sometimes people compress stuff and don't need to compress it. Sometimes people might need, they don't use enough compression. Sometimes people will over compress and so forth. And it's kind of like, I think compressors are a tool out of all of it that you really need to master to get right, because compression can really make or break along with EQ. Most of the time when it comes to reverbs, a lot of times you can just muddy up a mix because you got too much reverb going on. Because reverbs are really designed to emulate space, but compressors, right? So it's kind of like, when do I want my compressor to work? And a lot of times that's where people don't seem to get right. Sometimes is, when do I need the compressor to work? And when it does stop working, how much ratio or compression I want to compress. Sometimes you don't need to compress a whole lot. You might only need to go 3-to-1 just to bring the peaks down a little bit on the dynamics. Sometimes if you're running 8-to-1 of compression, because we know it's like volume level or dBs, right? 8-to-1 means that so much 8 um, volume level, let's say 8 is going to compress it into one output, 8-to-1. That's your ratio, right? It's almost like how much is trying to go in versus how much is coming out. And I'm going to I can feed a whole lot, but I'm only going to let so much out. I can feed a lot coming in, but not a whole lot's going to come out. This is, and the more you do that, the more you allow in to compress into one, it's going to sound, you're squeezing, they call it squashing, whatever. And then the next thought about process would be is how fast, do I need to compress? And then, of course, there's the release, how fast I need to hear what's been compressed. And then if the volume gets low, when I start compressing, I use a makeup gain to bring the volume up, right? So that is a tool on compression that really, I would say, is something that a person, if they're not good at compression, should really practice compression, right? EQ, here's another complicated subject on equalization. So let me read a few comments before I talk about EQ. Okay, Rockport Ticker says compressors are used for tone, color, and transit control. Different ones used are different tastes. Some are for recording, mixing, and mastering, stacking compressors, and common with EQ. I'm going to say I might have to disagree a little bit with that statement. Compressors are really more for control of dynamics and peaks, not tone. The thing is, when you're compressing, it creates tone, but that's not what they're for. They're not there for tone. They're there to compress and control dynamics and peaks. That's why if you look at, they call them peak limiters and stuff like that. They don't call them tone. It's just that certain compressors, they generate a tone as you compress, but the object is, really the overall, your compression is your ratio. Well, your ratio of what you're compressing in to what's coming out is creating the tone, a compressed tone. And some compressors do it better to make it sound more musical than others. But, but it is, as far as dynamic and, stuff like that, yes, it's there because it's a dynamic controlling tool, really, more than anything. Let me see. So, let me see. What I missed on the did I miss something? It says mortgage, food, and gear. Let me see. Did I miss something? I must have missed something on that because I'm not understanding the mortgage, food, and gear. But okay. Okay, yeah. Now I will agree with that. Stacking, EQ compressors to make them work less hard and target as an everyday. Yeah, now I will agree with that. War says originally intended to be a transparent dynamic control, and adding certain circuits added color and became, yeah. I would say that's probably a little bit more accurate. Nakala Studios. I ain't seen you in here in a while. Oh, hope you've been doing well. Nakala Studios, welcome. So the mic pre's on my mind is M32. I have a imprint invoice Mark II that's great for vocals and gotcha. Okay. He said with digital tracks, we definitely, because when I talk about digital, I'll say this and I'll say this till I'm blue in the face, like the color the shirt, blue, right? A lot of times when we say analog versus digital, really, we're really is um, digital versus conversion. Because digital itself, which is a binary ones and zeros, actually don't make sound. The better your digital, your AD to D converter that convert and the sampling rate and so forth, the better digital can sound based on how well it can convert back from digital into analog that we as humans can understand. So it's always really been more analog versus digital conversion. Um, so I think it's the you hear this thing about harmonic distortion and harmonics and all this to the analog that really sounds warmer and fuller compared to digital. Um, but there's always going to be, I don't know, it's just going to be an ongoing. Sometimes it's just you can't get into the argument because some people they're not convinced that they're like, well, digital is just as good as digital is just as good as analog. I'm like, um, I just try to avoid that argument because it gets into a lot of so let me see, let me read a few more comments. Whenever you compress and you are changing the tone because the dynamics are morphed, it's kind of like you have to be careful how you compress because here's the thing about transits and everything else, but compression, think about it, compressing, you have the same sound and you compress it. There are certain pieces of gear that can compress. How much am I compressing? Think of you're putting weight on something. You take your pillow, you push some weight down on it. You're compressing that pillow. But you don't want to make the pillow flat. You're trying to just push a little bit of, or anything that you're squeezing without killing its shape. Or I don't know how the best way I can describe it, but compressing audio in a way that still makes it sound good. Because you can have a really high-end piece of compressor gear, and if you over compress, it's still not going to make that whatever you're trying to use to compress sound good. If you over compress, I don't care what it is. So I think that's the best described. That's probably that's a good way, and that's a good analogy. Compressors were engineered to solve problems, especially volume dynamic peak problems more than anything. So Ice Mark 1200 says, is that a Soundcraft board? No, it's an Allen and Heath. This is a GL 3800 48 channel Allen and Heath. Excuse me. So Warhard says, you mean, no, I'm not. I try not to be, but Tactical Mix says, the only thing I'm missing is a preamp, man. You got to get a preamp, Tactical. Got to get a preamp, man. Got to get a preamp. Ice Mark 12 says, analog is king. I'm not going there. I'm going to say analog is a tool. I'll leave it that. Creative Soul says, I recently saw a video of a recording on Pro Tools and an 8-track, 16-track, and 2/4 track, and 2-inch. The 8-track opened up, sound great. Stereo. Oh, yeah, I think you the one I saw too. I think the 8-track 200 and Pro Tools was done at Blackbird. And they were, of course, so, and I wrote in the comment too, it says one of the reasons why I miss recording the tape. Because I used to record the tape. What I don't miss, I like tape. What I don't miss about tape is, you can't edit tape like you can in a DAW. If they had a way to edit like you can on tape, if you could edit on tape like you could on in the Pro Tools, yeah, tape, I would be definitely using tape machines. But you can't. Tape machines, Studers and all that, and MCI and all these different tape machines are not in the same league when it comes to the things that you can do in a DAW. What you do in your Pro Tools or your Logic or your any DAW that you're using, tape machines are not even in the same league. They're nowhere as far as editing, not even the same league. Matthew says, even dudes who says analog is a scam on YouTube is still recommending some kind of, I've never heard anyone saying that analog is a scam. Like, why would you think analog is a scam? And that's how we started. I don't know how anyone would say analog is I don't know why would you say that when that's how you start. Every recording, even prior to the 2000s, is analog. They were still recording with a console, tape machine, using outboard. It was mostly analog, including the musicians, a drummer, bass player, guitar player, keyboard player, horns, vocals. That's all analog. So I think that's someone who just, I don't know what, But anyhow, Chris says, I used to record the tape. I did too. Bounce. I like tape. I like tape. So I think I was clickbait, but I think he took it. It is clickbait. A Rockport Ticker says, you lube be it. Yeah, it's kind of like, which bring me to the next thing about the EQ I was going to talk about. Okay, so now we talked about our mic, right? And the only other thing when it comes to mics is placement, right? Where am I going to place this microphone to capture the source? Because proximity also matters in mic placement. And then, of course, we know the mic itself has still got to go through a preamp because you got to pre-amplify mic signals, right? And everyone knows, depending on the mic preamp is going to determine the source or the tone of the microphone going through that preamp, because preamps create tone. Some preamps just don't have any tone, and some are colorless, or they're flat or whatever. And then there's some preamps that actually bring some tone quality in conjunction with the microphone. And that's going to the next sources. A lot of times where we want to record, before we record to our tape or our DAW, we need to get a little bit, maybe some EQ. Sometimes people say, well, my proximity is the EQ. As you put a microphone away from the source, it starts to sound higher in and a little bit thinner. But as you get closer to the microphone, like me, getting closer to this microphone would start to make it sound a little bit deeper and warmer. So it really depends. Really, or I can just, right now I got the EQ. I can just take the mids out, make it sound like that. Or I can bring mids and I can get rid of the low end and make it sound thin, like I'm talking through a telephone. Or I can bring the low end and I can just get rid of the high, like this, right? So it really depends on EQ, but compression, so that way I can limit volume peaks. So that way if someone is a belter and they're real loud, I still don't want my recordings to clip. I don't want them to be, I'm still getting this astronomical loudness. That's, it really depends. And they say, one thing when analog is better at taking volume levels than digital. A raw port ticker said you can edit tape. It's called no. I can do that. I'm not doing that. I've seen, because even on the tape machine, some machines they even got the where you got slots where you can. No, I'm not. No, not when I can mouse click and slide and cut and Control Z and Control L and all this other stuff. Click, 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 and move my tracks the way in the no. That is way more, because if you cut the tape, you can't uncut the tape. At least in the DAW, you could undo what, and it's called non-destructive editing. Because once you cut tape, that's it. Yeah, talking about I can tape it back. Yeah, but you cut the tape. I'm not doing that. So let me see. Let's see, one of my favorite mix engineers despise compressors. Or maybe I shouldn't. Oh, you might be talking. I'm not sure if you're talking about I would say Bruce Sweeting. He was not a fan of compressors, but he used compressors, believe it or not. He just wasn't a fan of them, if we're talking about him, you know. But there are quite a few. Al Schmidt was not very big on compressors or EQs either. But there are mixing engineers that do well, like Chris Algie and so forth, that, you know, or Dave Pensado or Andrew Sheps that are big on compressors. You know, Michael Brower and so forth. There's a lot of those mixing engineers that definitely use compressions and EQs for the, you know, in their tool arsenal. So let's see. Rapport compression is in mixing is targeted, i.e. vocals, drums, percussion. Yet you don't want to kill dynamics, which will ruin. It's kind of like knowing how to use the tools. Ice Mike says 1200 says I am a tape splice editor. I would tell him I would not doubt that. For me, I like I just like working in the DAW for that reason. But the sound of tape is just amazing, because that's what I grew up on, right? And then of course, Rob Portico said you can solder the tape back together. Warhart says that's terrifying work. Like I said, on the tape, I just, love the sound of it. I just wouldn't want to edit that way, even though they used to edit that way, because that you had no choice. You had to edit that way. Like if I got a cassette to break, I don't even like trying to tape the cassette back together. But if I really would like the music that's on that cassette, I got no choice but to tape it back together, right? So moving on so now we talked about compressors. The threshold is when I want the compressor to start, and then how much do I want to compress is the ratio. When do I want it to start compressing? How fast is the attack? And then the releases, how fast I want to hear the compressor doing what it's doing. I'm gonna make it do what it do, right? And in the makeup gain, in case it gets volume, you want to bring the volume back up to match the gain stage, the level back to a level. And every compressor does it. The way it compresses sounds different. But then after, then the next thing is EQ, because we got there's filtering and then there's EQing, right? Filtering is I'm going to cut off high end that I just don't want to hear, or I'm going to cut off low ends that I just don't want to hear. So, we get this thing with HPF and LPF, low pass filtering and high pass filtering. So with low pass filtering, which means that anything on low pass filtering or high pass filtering, so I'll start with high pass filtering, that's more common, is anything below a certain frequency will pass. This means letting higher frequencies pass in the filter. So anything, let's say our high pass filter 100 hertz. So anything below 100 hertz is going to be cut off. That's done by design, because when it comes to EQing, we do not like, it's called crowd control as well. If you got 25 sources going, you're going to need to crowd control some of that with EQing. You don't want frequencies fighting with each other. In other words, I don't need to have, if my bass and kick drum is below 100 hertz in the lower frequencies, well, I don't need keyboards and guitars and vocals in those same frequencies fighting the bass drum and the kick drum. So a lot of times I would either EQ, I will not even EQ something below that, or I'm going to put on a filter. Like I'm going to automatically set high pass filters on vocals so it doesn't go below 100 hertz, right? Or 80 hertz or whatever, automatically filtering, right? Other than that, a lot of times what's more desirable is band pass filtering, or what we call, passive filter. In other words, bandwidths versus notch filtering. But some people like notch filtering. Notch filtering is basically isolated filters that you can either attenuate, or boost. So a lot of times when you see a filter on an EQ, or you see, or not a filter on an EQ, but if you see an EQ and you see the filter frequency on fixed frequencies, you'll see something like, this is probably something that common you'll see on fixed filtering. We've seen them on EQs on stereos in cars, some stereo equipment for homes or whatever, even rack mount units. And you'll see something like maybe 60 hertz, 80, 100, 150, 200, 300, 500, 800, 1,000, 2,000, 2,500, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10, 12, 14, 16, and then 20,000 hertz, right? It depends on how many notch filtering controls they put on that, right? Those are usually the common fixed frequencies that you see on what we call a notch filter, notch type of EQ. And you usually can boost, or you might need to specifically only need to boost or cut a design frequency like 80 hertz. I need to attenuate. So anything below the zero, we call the zero line, the unity line, below that, I'm going to attenuate. I'm going to, reduce the volume level of that frequency. A lot of times that's better, especially when it comes to, like, let's say live performance. A lot of times people will use a band pass filter when you really want to use a notch frequency, because, for example, let's say you're mixing a live show, and all of a sudden you start hearing, right, low end frequency. We're talking, we're in the 200, 300 hertz range, and that might be coming from a microphone, coming from a vocal mic, or even a guitar cabinet or whatever. So I need to, let's say it's 200, so I need to notch 300 hertz. So I'm going to go to that notch filter and bring that volume level down, or it might be a little bit more midish, more around the mid range, around 1,000, 2,000, 2K. You need to bring that particular frequency down. You got to figure out what sources. So we use an RTA to see where the source is coming from. And the RTA is which stands for real-time analyzer. You turn that on and so forth. But then the other times when we use a band pass type of filter, in other words, a pass EQ where you got 4 bands. You got a high, mid, low, and low, right? And you have a sweepable band. So this sweepable band is going to, even though you're going to boost or cut certain, you'll notice that on that band pass, as you move it across the frequency range, you may be boosting 4 dBs of 100 on a band pass, but you're also going to boost 80, say it's 100 hertz or whatever. You're also going to boost a little bit of 80, a little bit of 60, but it's not going to be as much because it's doing as a band, unless you want to notch it and really make the frequency like this or like this, depending on your boosting or cutting. So I'm hearing low end bass because that's my idiot neighbor in his car with his 18s that's sitting at a corner thinking if someone, you know how some people how can I say it? When you are suffering from lack of attention, um, and you don't like the fact you're not attention, I'm going to make people watch me, even though no one cares. It's almost like I got a neighbor's like, you ever seen? It's almost like someone that buys an expensive luxury or sports car to show off this expensive luxury sports car to people that don't care. There's like, believe it or not, more people. If you buy a Porsche 911, most people don't care you have a 911. Only envious, jealous people might care that you have a Porsche 911. The average person, they can care less if you get a Porsche 911. They don't care. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to do burnouts in the circles to watch. Look at me. I'm my Porsche. That's he's that type of person. But I see, okay, I hear it's gone. So he left. I'm like, you blasting your speakers when no one cares that you're blasting your music. But anyhow, moving on. So moving on to that that band pass. So if you ever watch on a band pass where you are mid high, and let's say you're going to boost 350, or you're going to cut 350, 2 or 3 dBs of 350 on a band pass, you're also still, if you attenuate 350 hertz on a band pass, you're still going to attenuate all the frequencies up into the zero line. You look at your band pass. And so sometimes you have to notch that and make it a little bit so it doesn't affect those other frequencies as much. So let's take that band pass, you have to make it, I'm only going to affect 350, but so that's why sometimes you might want to use a notch filter over a band pass filter. And then a lot of times what sweeping means, okay, I'm going to sweep between 350, maybe drop it down to 300 or go up to 400 that I'm going to boost or cut. That's sweeping across that band pass, that bandwidth. So that's ideal. A lot of people like that because it also does something musical to the other frequencies. But you might want to attenuate 350 on a keyboard, but it's also, if you got something else that still I want to attenuate 350 on a keyboard, but I got vocals in the 300 range as well. So I might have to sweep or boost or cut a little bit around their vocal range as well. So I had to learn that when it comes to EQing, what type of filtering and what type of EQ I'm doing as well on EQing. EQing can be a video in itself. A lot of people get that wrong because what they're hearing in their monitors to make them EQ certain things because the room isn't right can make you EQ things wrongly. So you have to really be careful. That's why it's kind of like, my monitors tell me, but then you get in the car across other mediums or whatever, and like, well, nah, that don't sound like I thought it did, So believe it or not. So let me see. Did I miss some stuff because I was yapping my gums? So let's see. Okay. Oh yeah, he's talking about water. Somebody's loud insecurity mobile. Yeah, it's just it's like my mother neighbor. It's about to be 9:30. It's like you got all day. 4, 3, 2. Where were you at? She'll get out there and start revving this motorcycle that she can't ride. Is always broke, but it sits in her driveway, and she'll get there, just revving it up. Y'all probably seen me when I did a couple live streams where she was doing that, and I'm like, and you want to do that? You want to wait till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night to do that when you could have been doing that around 2 or 3 o'clock when everyone's up. You get 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Some people are going to bed by then because they got to work. But she's that type of person. I got a few neighbors like that. I'm like, in other words, I'm just saying I got a couple of idiot moron neighbors. I do. So, oh yes, too many people spend money that they haven't earned to buy things they don't want to impress people they don't like. Will Rogers? Yeah, exactly. That's a really good. That's a famous quote. Yeah, a lot of people will spend money that they don't have, meaning buying it on credit cards or debt, to buy things they don't necessarily want. They think it's going to impress others a lot, and most of the people that they're trying to impress, like you said, don't like them. You'd be amazed, like how many people that don't, you trying to impress don't like you. Um, so that is a true statement. Oh, he said not Sweeting. He said regular mixer named Opleton Brown. Okay, gotcha. Okay, I've never heard of him, but okay, gotcha. We all have engineers that we, or we always have um, people that we admire their work. So, but yeah, going back to the EQ thing. So that I would say with the compressor, the EQ, if people master those two things right, when it comes to frequencies and compression, and I started with, for me, I started um, with preset starting points. Like it would say something like, um, you want to add 8,000 here, cut 2,500 there, cut 250 here, but you want to boost 100 there. And it'll say why you want to boost or why you want to cut on certain things. And as an example, and the reason being is because it creates presence, but gets rid of muddiness or whatever the case may be, or whatever. You want to boost 8K, but you don't want to boost 7K. Why don't you want to boost 7K? You don't want to create semblance. 8K, but you do want to boost 8K as an example because you want to create clarity as an example. So I start with that, and the same thing. Well, what do you want to compress? Well, I want to run a 4-to-1 ratio. I want to run a fast attack, but a medium released. My threshold is going to be at this starting point, whatever. And why? Because it creates depth or dynamic depth in your mix or whatever. So that was the very reason why I started doing that, and I started learning how the compressor affects whatever drums, snare, hi-hats, vocals, instruments. And those were the two main keys. The thing that I had to learn with reverbs, the things that I had to learn with that is when to reverb, what type of reverb going to create, a plate versus a hall, concert hall versus a long hall versus a chamber, whatever. And the pre-delay, how fast do when I went to, same thing with attack on a compressor, like pre-delay, how fast I want to start hearing reverb. And the decay, how long do I want the reverb that reverb tail? So you hit let's say you hit a snare going crack and you hear, Kah. Do I want that reverb tail hanging over? A lot of times you don't, because you can start creating muddiness, because a lot of times, especially when faster music, you have long reverb tails. By the time you hear the effect of the reverb affecting the snare, it went back to the kick. And then the snare again, and the first time that reverb hits, the first time it hits the snare, it's so hanging over that it starts to sound muddy. So a lot of times you want to shorten the delay. And the same thing, how much of a reverb, is it in a small room, big room, how much diffusion and dampening and so forth when it comes to that reverb. Can be the difference between the reverb sounding too much in the mix or whatever. Same thing with delays. It's kind of like, what's the best way I can do? I will use like this, my pen on here, left, like a delay, right? Like a delay like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a bouncing delay, it's bouncing across the room like this. You probably can, I don't know if y'all can hear that, but it's kind of like a delay, but it's really, really, I'm trying to do it as fast as I can. It depends on the delay. The delay is the bouncing effect of sound in the room, right? You got ping pong delays, you got slap delays, you got spring verb, spring delays and so forth. So sometimes we want to create that effect too. And then there's, other than just for effects, I think other than that, I think the only other thing that I've seen is people not setting up their DAW properly. I've seen people where they were trying to do everything, reverbs, delays, compressors and all that, all on the same channel. And I'm like, if you want your stuff to sound bigger, you want to make sure that your reverbs and delays are on their own auxiliary channel, and you blend those channels with the original channel. And another thing I've seen where people wouldn't create bus channels. A lot of times they'll say, well, I'm going to put all my drums, drum, kick, snare, hi-hat, and I'm going to you run that all into his own stereo bus. You know, so I'm going to create a stereo bus channel for the drums, and then I'm just going to put one bus compressor on to affect the entire sound of the drum, the dynamics of the entire drum all together. And a lot of times that can make the difference in your in the mix. Like for example, the first set of channels, I usually have drums on these channels. All these are routed to 1 and 2. So I'm going over to buses 1 and 2 here for my drum bus. And then I'll basically patch in a compressor as a drum compressor into a 2 stereo bus channel. So so it really depends on, this is what I've seen, certain mistakes I've seen people do in their setups. So let's see what else. So did I miss some comments? Let's see. Too many people. Yeah, see. Okay. Rob Picker says no, separate channels as a group per type, reverb, delay, compression, saturate, etc. So going back to so that's basically what I'm saying is basically do not. Anyone, people can do whatever they want. But me, personally, I'm not putting my reverbs or delays on the same channel as my drums. They're going to be on the aux channel. And those two are going to be blended, you know. This is what 90% of most engineers do, and so forth. So setting up your DAW to do that as well. So let me see, what did I there that did not cover in my title? So I talked about mics. I talked about in the beginning. I talked about mics. I talked about mic pre's. Talked about compressors. I talked about EQ, compressors. What else? A little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay. What else? So now I did a video a while back before I end the live chat tonight. Oh, speakers. Yeah, Chris Waters. Yeah, speakers. That's right. I didn't talk about monitors. Okay. For the longest, I finally convinced myself, and I'm sure I don't recommend. Let me type my mic because my mic is falling. So let me turn that down a little bit and tighten this. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right, there we go. Let me bring the volume back up. Okay. All right. For the longest, I'm not saying that everyone can't get great results with two-way speakers, but I decided for me, when I was going to the higher end recording studios, of course, you know, the famous two-way speakers I always see was Yamaha NS10s. And so, you know, I got a pair of speakers that are equivalent to those. They're not quite Yamahas, but they're the Lisa's Monitor ones, which is these gray ones. You'll see right there. Those are the Lisa's Monitor, but those are pretty much mid-rangiest, flat kind of compared to the Lisa's without spending the Lisa's NS10 spending money, because I think those at the time were $1,200 or $1,400 monitors at the time. You know, you probably, if you can even find Yamaha NS10s today. So going back to that, but I was going to say going back to and then of course, so I've been used to using two-way monitors for years. But I just, you know, I would go into, when I would see them, not only the Yamaha NS10s, they would, a lot of these recording studios would have three-way reference speakers. You know, they would have like maybe Focal Trios or maybe some three-ways by Barefoot, or maybe they would have ATCs and so forth. Or even, you know, they would have, you know, Quested speakers or whatever the case. A lot of these were three-way monitors. And I'm like, okay. And then sometimes they would have like oral tones or whatever, cubes or whatever. And then of course there would be speakers in the wall, like a pair of Osbergers or whatever the case may be, or maybe some PMCs or whatever, dying out or whatever it is in the wall, Ocean Waves or whatever. But when I start listening to stuff on three ways, I'm like, oh, all of a sudden, mid-range, problematic things I would hear in the mid-range, they weren't, you could hear it with two-way speakers, but they weren't prevalent. I was like, as I would hear on three-way, I was like, it would be very distinctive. I can really hear it. I knew it was there on two ways, but three ways, you could definitely hear it. I'm like, oh. So finally I said, well, I need to get some three ways. So everyone knows I probably recently got the Cali audio. These are the Cali 8-inch, the 8-inch, because of the size of this room, 8-inch Calis. And then I also went back down and started listening to some of the Dyne audios. I've listened to Adams and quite a few other, listened to Focals and so forth. And I really was impressed with the Cali audios, and I'm also impressed with the Dyne audios. So those are the two sets that I'm looking. I already got the Cali audios, but I'm definitely looking to get the Dyne audio as well. Three ways. And now we all know that a lot of people listen to music on their Androids, iPhone, the speakers on that, or most people are listening to maybe even studio, computer speakers like your Mac or PC, whatever. You're not going to, the details in mixing is not going to be real prevalent on those. You might even hear a lot more details in headphones, but most people are listening on crappy systems anyway. So would it really matter? It will matter when people do listen to something on high quality stuff. They will hear, if they even know what they're listening for. Some people don't know what they're listening for. Something with I would say really cheesy sounding bass and cheap high end. Because I've seen people, even a car stereo, they'll buy a car stereo system and buy like Boss 6x9s. You're not gonna hear Boss 6x9s are not gonna sound as good as like Clarion or Alpine 6x9s or Kicker or whatever. It's just they're not. So that's another subject in itself on what people are listening to music on. So so it really depends on so let me see. Oh yeah, where it says comp could be parallel on a group or wet on the channels. It just depends what you're doing on parallel compression or whatever the case. Let's see. Okay, says I want my listening jump speakers are hi-fi 4-way, and my mix monitors are 2-way JBLs. Like me, I have the JBL 305s. Some people have the GL 308s for the 8-inch, and so forth. But it really depends. Matthew asks, how much are the cheapest three ways? Like me, affordable three ways are these Calis. These Calis are $5.99 a piece. You can, I would say, if you're looking for affordable three-way monitor, look at the Calis. They are very affordable and they sound good. So for something affordable, because once you start getting into even Dyne audios are still for a set are still can run you $1,400 a piece, and that's the Dyne audio LYDs. The Dyne cordial audios are still $2,200 a piece. Those are Dyne audios. The Atom A8, A8Hs are $1,600 a piece, which is $3,200. But once you start getting that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range, for three ways. But the thing is, of course, the speakers I really want, which is ATC SCM 25As. Ooh, can you say $8,000 to $10,000? They're about $4,000 to $5,000 each. So, but I've been in studios with ATCs, and we're talking in studios. These commercial. These are the ones that are, they're mixing major artists on those type of speakers. Is what I'm saying. So, Chris Ross said, "Have I heard of?" Oh, yeah, definitely PMC audio, which is, yeah, I think the PMC is it PMC 60s. I think it's PMC 60. Let me pull it up. PMC. I'm gonna look at PMC audio studio monitors. Oh yeah, the PMC 6s. Get a load of the price of those. PMC 6 dual, which they have their own DSP processing and so forth. Can you say $12,000 to $14,000 for those PMCs? And of course, the big ATs, and these are not even the big ones, but the more popular, like Joe Ciccarelli, that out of Sunset Sound, uses these ATC SCM 45As. Almost $14,000 for those. Yeah. But anyhow, because seeing out of all that, between your mics, mic pre's, equalizers, compressors, whether you have a console or not a console, preamps, everything, if your studio doesn't have proper monitoring, you got to hear what's coming out of your speakers. Some people say, well, I can use headphones, but headphones is a whole totally different thing than trying to create a stereo image, because you got music coming directly into your ear and the other, your left and right, as opposed to hearing the stereo image that is coming from your studio monitor. This is the reason why I mix on studio monitors and not headphones. But so anyhow, let me see. I got a few more comments before we end for the night. And let's see. Oh, Matthew says, I want a nice room to go. Yeah, exactly. It's just so. Let's say Rockport, Texas. I built a Frankenstein pair of Serwin Vegas 5 mid JVC Twitters and a Polgato sub 80. Yeah, because it's almost like you can take audiophile type of speakers and build your own three-way speaker system. You can build it. There are do-it-yourself. There is do-it-yourself studio monitors, which I thought about. Getting the specs on like an ATC set of speakers, the specs on the box, and just build it, and then just buy the speakers. But then a part of it is also the preamp or the amplification that comes in those, because those are active speakers. They're not passive where you need an additional power amp. Those are active where they have their own amplifier. So so it really varies, but that's another thing, is monitoring. So our Warhard says, if you know your monitors, you're going to be okay. Yeah, because if you know them well and you know when to add and when to cut and when to boost and things like on EQing and everything else, and it's going to reference, that your mix is going to reference in the car and a whole lot of other. In other words, it's going to reference, and it makes the mastering a whole lot easier. Then yeah, I definitely would say so too. But sometimes it's like, well, sometimes people can buy studio monitors. It doesn't matter if they're KRKs or Yamaha HS8s or whatever. Sometimes it's like, well, I don't know what I'm listening for. So So it's kind of like you have to know what you're listening for to know what to listen for, if that makes sense. So other than that, so to wrap it up, to sum it up, what did I talk about tonight? I talked about mics. I didn't go a whole lot of details on mics. I don't think a whole lot of people was on the live chat at that time yet. So I did talk about, this is a heavy mic too. This is a AKG C12 clone. So I talked about two microphones, and one of my all-time favorite solid state is the Rode NT22A. And I did talk about ribbon microphones. This is a ribbon microphone. This is the MXL R80. Really good. I like this on my guitar cabinet. So, let me type this right quick. Hold up right quick. Give me 1 second. So, and then I talked about the dynamic microphone, like my favorite two dynamic microphones, super affordable. And I recommend people getting, especially if you're going to record instruments and you want affordable, you want some affordable dynamic microphones that get the job done and get it done well, is an SM57 and an SM58. I like the SM58 on guitar cabinets. I like the SM58 or 57 on drums, toms, snare, for the most part. Then I like a Shure, like a D12 or something like that on the kick. Shure microphones on kick. And I might mix that with I got a 47, the Warm Audio 47 Junior, in comparison with that, as well as I might have a SM57 closer to the beater head of a kick drum inside the kick drum, SM57. So I would say probably a good investment, maybe 6 to 8 SM57s and 6 to 8 SM58s. Those are very affordable microphones. You can get each one of those for under $100, and that will cover a lot of your sources if you're going to record, especially a band. And then quite a few, build up a few maybe quite a few ribbons. You don't have to get in some, like me. I have the MXL R80 ribbon microphones. Those do well because I'm not spending $14,000 on Royers. Royers are super expensive. And then of course, if you want to know how good this Rode NT2 microphone, there is a video on YouTube where they did a recording session using I think it was an RCA Studios or one of the studios in Nashville, where he used this on pretty much every source: piano, vocals, guitar, bass. I mean, they use it on everything. And you could go listen to that recording on YouTube yourself. Using, recording, if you're on the right video because it'd be a guy with glasses explaining. He's one of the mixing engineers. If you want to hear this Rode, but I got two of these. But I also have quite a few other condenser microphones as well. But you can't go wrong. So I talked about that, preamps. There's so many different preamps out there. Then I talked about compression EQ. So that's going to wrap it up. That's going to wrap it up. And let's see. That's it for tonight. I just wanted to talk about those things. So other than that, that's going to do it for tonight. So Rockport Ticker said, I'm going to buy the Slate Molly. Okay. That would be cool. Let us know next time, how do you like it? Let's see. Jazz Lamel, do you know that they have the MXF mics that can be modeled into a U? Believe it or not, I'll give you, and I'll end it like this. And I'll wrap it up. This microphone that I'm using now, it's called an MXL 2006. It's the Mogami edition. I went and found out about this microphone when I was watching a video. This is a long time ago, and it's a website called Audio Test Kitchen. It's called Audio Test Kitchen. If you ever get a chance to check Audio Test Kitchen out, and this Marshall MX 2006 edition microphone was in the same EQ tolerance range as a Elam 251 Telefunken microphone. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wait a minute. Except the MXL 2006 is thousands of dollars cheaper. I think an Elite Elam 251 microphone is about 20 grand. Well, you can buy these Marshall MXL 2006 for about a couple $100, if that, maybe $150, if that, and so forth. And there are also, like me, I've upgraded this with better caps in this Marshall. I bought the cap upgrade to make the microphone sound warmer, and I bought that kit. And so there's things you can do, like they have on microphoneparts.com. You can buy Marshall microphones and upgrade them with better components. And you could save yourself thousands of dollars modding your microphone, like I did with my Marshall MXL 990s. I've upgraded the components in it, and it makes a difference. So that's one route you can look at doing. So I would say that. But other than that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We're going to wrap it up and call it a day. And we'll see y'all next time I do the live stream. So once again, I thank everyone for always tuning in. If y'all got any, I want to dive a little bit more deeper into EQ, compression, reverb, mic pre's, and stuff like that. Again, next time we talk, I want to dive a little bit more deeper into it. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time. Thanks for tuning in. That's it. Y'all have a great one.